When it comes to the Overwatch League, I think most fans can agree that making predictions is really fun. Most of us enjoy doing it about pretty much anything too. I've seen predictions ranging from something like who will win the grand finals to something a bit more unique, such as a team's projected starting lineup for an example. And you guys know me, I love making predictions on pretty much everything I can. But the thing is, those are all about me when I do those types of videos. And after I got a great video suggestion on my Discord server, I came up with a really good idea for today's video. Over the last couple of days, I've been asking all of you on the community tab and over on my Twitter some questions regarding predictions for Season 3 of the Overwatch League, and today I'll be recapping some of the most popular answers I received, as well as the ones that sound interesting since not everybody agrees with what the majority thinks, obviously. Oh, and by the way, I had no influence with these answers at all. All I did was the math, and I offered some insight into what I think of some of these answers. But that's basically everything I needed to explain here in the intro, so without wasting any more time, let's begin with question number 1. And that question was, who will be the winners of the Pacific and Atlantic conferences? And unsurprisingly, the most popular answers for the Atlantic division were the NYXL and the Atlanta Reign, who came in a close second. Meanwhile, the overwhelming majority selected the San Francisco Shock as the favorites to win the Pacific, and I mean, it wasn't even close. There was 103 votes for the Shock, and the second closest behind them was the Seoul Dynasty, who had a grand total of 10. The reason I say these results were unsurprising is due to the fact that this is what I've seen all over the internet. Everybody's super high on the Shock, and how could they not be? They still have one of the strongest rosters in the league. Then looking at the NYXL and the Atlanta Reign, I think you could make the argument they are the two strongest teams in the Atlantic division right now, and I think New York still has a really strong roster and a good coaching staff. Then the Reign made a whole bunch of upgrades this offseason and look like true title contenders for a lot of people now since they brought in the likes of Gator, Hawk, Sharp, and even Edison. So I didn't really ask people to explain why they picked the teams they did, but some people went ahead and did so anyway, and some of the common answers I saw were that the Shock are the only right team to pick, or that their roster was still one of the best in the league, and people also made sure to let me know that they think that the new pickups for both Atlanta and New York will be major difference makers that could push these two teams over the top. A few of the other semi-popular selections I saw were the Fusion, Dragons, Dynasty, and the Gladiators. The Gladiators one in particular really caught my attention though. I didn't realize that people thought of them that highly still. They added in some good pieces this offseason for sure, but I know I'm not the only one who thinks their DPS are still kind of unproven. But who knows? Maybe this team will end up being a big time sleeper pick, kind of like with some of these others that I saw. It's good to see some different takes aside from the typical Shock answer though, even if they do seem like the obvious choice. Now let's move on to question number 2, and for that one, I asked you guys, who will win the grand finals? The typical answers from the previous question once again made their presence felt with this one. The Shock, Reign, and NYXL received the most votes by a good margin, with the Shock being the most popular team yet again. They received a survey high 58 votes. If you ask me though, it appears that some people were reluctant to pick the Shock thanks to what happened with the Spitfire. Either that, or they legitimately think the competition is going to be tough this year since so many teams appear to have made great improvements over the offseason. And from what I read, it appears that the reasoning behind the Shock, Reign, and NYXL getting so many votes has exactly to do with the same reasons from the last question. It's all about the power of the rosters plus their ability to play well in pretty much any meta thanks to flexibility with certain positions. Some of the other predictions that I saw a decent amount of for this question were the Fusion, Titans, Dragons, and Gladiators. The Fusion is somewhat understandable since they made a lot of upgrades this offseason, and I can kind of see it with the Titans too since they have a good team on paper. The Gladiators and Dragons picks I find very interesting though. Perhaps some of the voters are really confident in the OGE and Space tank line as well as Stand 1 and Void, or maybe it has something to do with the DPS. There's also the possibility that it's just a gut feeling. Regardless though, some people seem to have some really bold Dark Horse contender predictions here. Moving on to question number 3, I wanted you guys to tell me who you thought would make the Final Four in the playoffs, and while there still seem to be some pretty typical answers for this one, I did notice that this is when the predictions started to vary a bit. But I suppose that is to be expected when there's so many different possible combinations to choose from, right? Some of the common teams that made an appearance regardless of the combination though were the Reign, NYXL, Shock, and Fusion, and that also happened to be the combination I saw the most of when reading through the comments. It popped up quite a bit. Some of the other teams that people see as a potential threat to make it this far include, but are not limited to, the Justice, Gladiators, Dragons, Dynasty, Spark, and Titans. So while I still got many of the same answers from previous questions here, there were plenty of people who seemed to believe that at least one of the common teams being chosen would either choke or be a big letdown. The big one I saw a lot of was the Fusion. A lot of people just don't see it with them and firmly believe a team like the Dynasty, for an example, is superior. Then there's other people who think a team like New York or the Shock will find a way to choke. And with that said, there were some pretty unique opinions with this question, and there's honestly nothing wrong with that. If everybody had the exact same opinion, life would be pretty boring, would it not? Anyway though, let's move on to question number 4. For this question, I asked everybody which player would win the regular season MVP award, and from the results, there was a good mix of established veterans and rookies that people thought could walk away with this award. I got answers ranging from Sinatra winning it again, to guys like Who Are You and Chipsa being the ones to take it. The Chipsa one is kind of hard for me to take 100% seriously, since some people definitely appear to be memeing, but others did seem like they unironically thought he would win this award. And while I personally think it's a long shot of happening, I still wanted to bring it up anyway since a somewhat noticeable amount of people voted for him. On a more serious note though, the most popular choice for this question ended up being Erster, and this honestly is a really good prediction that I can get behind. It makes a ton of sense. Erster has always been a very good player since day one of his Overwatch League career, but his skill and overall value went underappreciated at times in 2019 since he was stuck on Brigitte for 3/4 of the season basically. But we saw how dangerous he could truly be during Stage 4, and him potentially doing that for a whole season makes him a pretty tempting choice for this question. As for some of the other popular answers I got, well, Corey came in a close second with only 7 fewer votes compared to Erster, and yet again, this seems like a pretty reasonable prediction. He was in a very similar boat to Erster where he could only show off his true potential for about one stage in Season 2. But in that short time period, he looked like a true superstar with how deadly he was on Sniper Heroes and Reaper, and if he picks up where he left off in the World Cup, then we very well could see Corey be in the running for this award too. A few of the other predictions I saw a decent amount of include Choyobin, Prophet, Mono, Lip, and Who Are You. So those first 3 make a ton of sense and seem pretty reasonable, but the Lip and Who Are You predictions seem a little on the bold side if you ask me. Even though it was only for a few show matches, a lot of fans are super hyped about Lip apparently, and Who Are You has always been a pretty popular player who's been pretty good in contenders, but the thing is, both of them have some stiff competition to work against if they even want to get consistent playtime on stage. DM and Libero are no joke. They'll either have to be in a situation where the meta or overall team style favors them, or they'll have to try and outplay DM and Libero, which is definitely a tall task. But you never know, they could pop off. Perhaps the people that voted for them know something that we don't, or maybe they simply have a lot more confidence in them than the average fan does. Overall though, this was probably one of the most fun questions to read the predictions for. There was a ton of variation with this question, and some of you had some crazy bold predictions that I found very intriguing. Now let's talk question number 5. For this one, I wanted you guys to tell me your prediction for Rookie of the Year, and unsurprisingly, there was once again a fair amount of Chipsa answers. He was nowhere close to the top, but he still had a noticeable number of votes. On a serious note, yet again though, the prediction I got the most of for this category was Edison of the Atlanta Reign, but this was a very, very close race. It's not like he won by a landslide, just a couple of votes separated him from Leave and Alarm. All of these players are really strong guesses. Edison and Leave are both considered by many to be top tier DPS prospects with superstar potential, and Alarm has long been considered one of the best flex support players in the world. With that said, these predictions are fairly reasonable, but who else received a good amount of votes, you may ask? Well, some of the ones I saw were Who Are You, Sparkle, Lip, and Glister. Although I still have the same worries for Who Are You and Lip that I did with the previous question, I think saying one of them winning Rookie of the Year is a bit more reasonable compared to MVP. But what about the Glister and Sparkle picks? Well, I definitely can see the Glister one. With the potential of this new London team being a big unknown, I would not be surprised in the slightest if he ends up being the best player on the team who puts up big performance after big performance. And Sparkle's in a very similar boat to him, but my one concern with Sparkle is that the voters will say he did not play enough games to have earned this award. And that's a fair argument. After all, he doesn't turn 18 until May 31st, which means that Sparkle will be missing 16 out of the Eternals' 28 games bare minimum. And that's not factoring in the chance that he could miss another game or two because of potential burnout. Some of the players I mentioned previously will likely have a far larger sample size to analyze, so they could be more appealing options to vote for. Question number 6. Who will be the most improved team? Well, according to you guys, it would seem that this one is very much up in the air. So this one ended up being a 5-team race between the Justice, Mayhem, Outlaws, Fusion, and Defiant, with Toronto just barely receiving the most votes. In all honesty, I think you can make a good case for any of these teams. Someone like Toronto, Washington, or Florida has so much room to be better compared to the 2019 version of themselves. This especially goes for the Mayhem since they came in last place. So realistically speaking, there's pretty much nowhere else to go but up, right? And with off-season acquisitions like Gangnam Jin and Yaki while getting Kuki as your new head coach, what's there to believe that they won't be at least a decent team? And you can say much of the same for someone like Toronto or the Justice and Outlaws. They made good improvements. In Toronto's case, they pretty much are starting off fresh, but on paper they have some really reliable looking players. Then there's the Justice, who still have that core of Arc, Corey, and Stratus, plus their Swedish tank line and the newly acquired AIM God at flex support. And how about the Outlaws? They finally upgraded that off-tank position with Meko, and they got themselves some competition at support by acquiring Repel and Jexay. Not to mention they also signed Hydration to replace Jake while signing Harsha as their new head coach. There's definitely a chance this team improves leaps and bounds if they're able to piece it all together. It's also worth mentioning that guys like Corey, Stratus, Surefour, Sayaplayer, and Linkser will be able to play more up to their potential now that there's no need for them to play Zarya or Brig. But what about the Fusion? Some might say it's a little weird to have them on here since they were already a top 10 team in the league record-wise last year, but even so, I can understand the argument for them earning this kind of award. I know the general opinion on this team is very split, but on paper they do look a lot stronger compared to last year. Plus, many of their players are or have at some point in their careers been considered stars. Then they also got players with a ton of potential such as Ivy and Hisu. While it could go either way for the Fusion, there's definitely a chance they look a lot better than last year and find themselves a bit higher up in the standings as a result. There's a whole bunch of teams who could make good strides in 2020, and it's clear that you guys agree with this based off of all the different predictions I had to read through. But now let's move on to question 7. Who will be the most improved player? But before I get into the answers I received, I wanted to mention that this question and the next one that we're going to talk about in a little bit had by far the most variation when it comes to the results. As for the answers to this specific question, well, I got a little bit of everything here. I had some that made sense, some that were bold, and others that I couldn't really understand. But let's start with the top votes before we get into all of that. Nobody had a ton of votes since there were basically just over 20 predictions, but Dogman and Decay were the leaders with Roar, OGE, and Carpe right behind them. All of these guys seem like pretty good guesses. I wouldn't say any of these players were bad in 2019, but all of them have room to improve when it comes to the consistency department. Even Carpe, who was in the conversation for MVP in Season 1, had his ups and downs. The 3 players, though, that were given new opportunities on a different team in particular seem like really good choices. It's that new team, new you type of vibe, you know? Realistically, they could all thrive under a new system that suits them better. But that does not mean I'm sleeping on Dogman or Carpe. For one, with how much Dogman has come along already since he joined the league, I think he could be in for a spectacular year that puts his rookie season to shame with the type of team he's surrounded by. Then with Carpe, well, we know what Carpe is capable of. Season 1 Carpe was an absolute nightmare, and if he regains that form, I don't see why he wouldn't win this award. That's enough about the top votes though. How about we discuss some of the other interesting selections, as well as some of the ones that sound somewhat realistic. So honorable mention number 1 belongs to Sato, and after the year he just had, he is in desperate need of a bounce back season, and if he works hard enough, then he might be able to turn some heads. If he is not a complete burden to the Fusion in 2020, then I don't see why he couldn't walk away with this award. With him being seen as the weakest link on this team, that may motivate him to improve. Another one I saw that I think deserves to be brought up is Birdring. I've said it here on the channel before, but this is probably his final chance to get back on the right track, so that alone might be enough of a motivator to push him to that next level. Maybe a fresh start is really all he needs to re-unlock that potential he showed before he suffered that wrist injury though. Birdring seems like a very realistic choice here. He's on a new team, he showed flashes of the old him late into Season 2, and he's probably the number 1 hit scan option on the team as of right now, so he'll likely get many opportunities to prove himself. Another really interesting response I saw a couple of times was LH Cloudy. Cloudy is a player who left a lot to be desired in Season 2, so it goes without saying that he can improve quite a bit. But with the Gladiators acquiring OGE, how much time is he truly going to get on stage? Unless something happens to OGE, or the team happens to play better with Cloudy in the lineup, I'm not so sure if I realistically see a world where he plays enough to earn praise of this magnitude. I most likely could sit here and talk about these answers for like another 10 minutes or so if I wanted to, but we don't really have that kind of time, so I'm going to start listing off a few other people now. So a few more names that caught my interest include Jonek, Happa, Corey, Stratus, Muma, Raucus, Taimu, Fissure, Note, and Fleta, and that's only to name a few. There was a wide range of takes here for sure, but now we have to move on. It's time for the 8th and final question. For this one, I threw in a wild card. Question 8 was to name a team or player that you think would surprise everybody, and that surprise can be one that is either positive or negative. And although this was such a specific question that got a ton of different responses, there still somehow ended up being a handful of common predictions, which kind of caught me off guard. But let's talk about it, shall we? So among some of the popular predictions for positive team outcomes, we had people saying that both the Fuel and Spitfire would play beyond expectations. Now some people did admit to me that there might be a little bit of bias involved here, but others did genuinely believe in these two teams. This especially goes for London. I saw a whole bunch of comments that considered them to be underdogs with a ton of upside. I also saw some responses that said similar things for the Valiant and Mayhem. A few of you even went as far as to say the Valiant might end up being like a decent team. Not quite playoff caliber, but still a lot better than people think. Then with Florida, I saw plenty of comments saying this would be their best season by far. Now obviously, the bar for them is not set very high, but it's still great to see people believing in this franchise and that they might actually be decent for once. I also saw a handful of you say that Boston could be a surprise yet again, which is pretty fair to say if you look at their history. Then Toronto got a fair amount of positivity as well, but that's to be expected since so many people seem to think they will be the most improved team. The same could be said for the Justice, who some of you seem to think are true playoff contenders this year. I saw similar comments with the Charge too. According to you guys, the Charge are once again a dark horse contender who could end up making the playoffs. But are the Charge really still being underestimated by others at this point? I thought the common consensus was that they were a great team heading into Season 3. I guess not. I guess people are still sleeping on them somehow. As for the negative outcomes, well, the two most popular answers by far were the Vancouver Titans and Philadelphia Fusion. It would seem that a lot of you are not sold on them yet. Many of you have told me you even think the Fusion and Titans won't be that good or that they'll just be middle of the pack at best. Some of the explanations behind these predictions had to do with gut feelings, fear of Sato bringing down the Fusion, and the Titans struggling with Bumper. I even saw one comment that said Jaehong and Fissure will mess this team up and will be a horrible fit. From the looks of it, there are plenty of Titans and Fusion doubters present, and I think it's understandable to have concerns for them. But other than those two, we also had a few people who were doubting the likes of the Shock and NYXL. There weren't many of them, but I did see a few responses saying these teams will play below expectations. But interestingly enough, some teams also happen to get both positive and negative reactions. I mentioned that there are those who doubt the Titans and the Fusion, but also the opposite happens to be true. There are people in this community who believe each of these teams will be even better than we think. Other teams that yielded mixed results where some fans say they won't be good while others think they will be solid include the Houston Outlaws, Shanghai Dragons, LA Gladiators, and Atlanta Reign. As for the player predictions, well, there were a bunch less compared to the teams, but the ones I did get were all over the place. For the positive predictions, I did get a few saying that Sato would play well this year. So once again, it would seem that there are some people out there who still have faith in the guy. Another cool one I saw was Gagery becoming a solid starter in the league. Definitely a unique and bold prediction considering the fact that she hasn't been all too amazing in her Overwatch League career so far, and she'll have to find a way to win the starting job over Void, who has always been a pretty reliable off-tank. Other that guy's going to pop off responses I got included Apply, No Smite, Dante, Meko, Saya Player, Doha, Glister, and Who Are You? The Apply and No Smite ones in particular are pretty interesting since they're still kind of unproven, but nonetheless, it's good to see the confidence spread out among so many different players. But what about the this guy's going to suck or not be nearly as good as you think predictions? Well, I honestly couldn't find any players who strictly had negative responses, but don't you worry, I still did get some that had a mix of both positive and negative. The big ones I saw for this one were Carpe, Fissure, and Sparkle. Some of you told me these guys would be really good, while others said things like Carpe will look washed up, Sparkle won't be that good, and Fissure will suck. So to say the least, those are some pretty daring takes considering how skilled these players are. But you never really know at the end of the day, right? Anything's possible. Sometimes things don't end up working out in the end, hence why you can't really rule anything out. It wouldn't be the first time the Overwatch League shocks us, that's for sure. But yeah, that's basically a wrap up on this community prediction video. So how did you guys feel about this type of video? Let me know what you think down in the comment section. I actually had a ton of fun doing this. It would not be opposed to making more of them in the future. So if you'd like to see me make more of these types of videos, then please tell me. Oh, and while you're at it, feel free to give me your answers to these questions if you were unable to participate in the initial survey. I'd love to hear your takes if you'd be willing to share them with me. But that pretty much does it for me, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I really do appreciate it. Make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.